Good. I'll get us started off here. A big welcome, first of all, to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this call today. Like we said, we're extremely excited to have not only the whole community here, but also you with us here as well, Steve. Just as a brief introduction to everybody, Steve is a director representing Boeing Commercial Airplanes Supplier Management. He's going on about 20 years of experience, if that's right, at the Boeing company, and he's held roles supporting the 737, 747, 767, 777, and 787 aircraft. And then he's now currently in a position as the Director of Avionics and Electronics. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today, Steve. As a quick introduction, my name is Joel Benson. I'm a senior in business marketing at Montana State University. I'm also a major in aviation. And co-leading the call today with me today is Ms. Sydney Henry from Georgia Southern University. And since this call is slightly different from ones we've done in the past, in the sense that we've met with you before, this is going to be mainly a follow-up, and we'd like to spend a lot of time answering the questions you posed to us. And so the way we were thinking about going about this was we sent you about 4 questions to have you answer, and so we'll spend about 15 minutes on those. And then we'll move into, the bulk of the call answering those questions, and we have members from the community who are ready to answer those. So unless we have any questions from the audience or from you, Steve, then I'll hand it over to Sydney to start with our questions.
I have no questions. Let's go.
All righty. So the first question that we want to ask you today is, looking back at our previous conversation that was in October, what steps do you think have been taken or are maybe you all planning to take to better integrate millennials into Boeing? If so, do you foresee them being effective? And if so, in what ways, for example?
Well, in terms of being effective, that remains to be seen. What I would say is, as an organization, we've done a lot in the last 6 months to transform our supplier. It's not even called supplier management anymore. We're actually just going to be called supply chain for Boeing commercial airplanes. And in that transformation, I actually have a new position. I'm going to be leading all of our structures and sub-assembly work for Boeing commercial airplanes. And that's a pretty significant shift from the previous assignment that I was in. But the mechanics of the whole change with the organization really were centered up on flattening the organization, taking out levels of management between our team members and senior leaders. And I think in a lot of the dialogue we had in that previous session, there was a lot of I think reference towards how do you tie the work more directly to the employee so that they can own that statement of work, have a sense of ownership, learn within the role, and then also gain a diverse perspective as they grow in the position. Make it more of a learning environment. And I certainly think what we've done with the organization is going to create that type of environment. Now, we're just in the process of rolling out the organization. Our launch date is actually this coming Monday. Feedback so far is that I think a lot of our employees are excited about it, but we're also nervous. It's significantly going away from a top-down model into a much more open collaborative space that our employees are going to be working in. And we're going to be asking our employees to lead a significant amount of our daily management responsibilities. So that from an organizational perspective. In terms of what are we going to do in terms of create that learning environment, one of the things we're really centering up on is looking at creating a rotation for our employees that are coming in, so that they'll think of it as almost like going to school on a semester program, go in and rotate 3 or 4 months through different positions, and then get after about a 18-month to 2-year rotation, really figure out what the best role for the employee is once they get into a more permanent role. So those would be the big things. And we're doing some, I'd say, more, just changing some of our mechanisms in terms of how we're communicating with the employees, opening up a lot of our dialogue, sharing our strategies, sharing our plans more, and getting regular cadences in place where a lot of the information we would typically hold close to the vest, we're getting more open in sharing that information. So those would be the big 3 focus areas.
That as a millennial myself, that sounds very appealing. It sounds very, I think people my age, millennials, would really appreciate collaboration and rotation specifically. That really jumped out to me. So thank you.
Yeah, I should know there's one area we're gonna focus on, and I think this one, as I look at the newer generation of employees coming into the company, it's just something we've got to figure out. Big focus, kind of a 4th bucket, and we're just not there yet, is looking at our current systems, business systems that we're using, to try to adapt and get more technology infused in what we're doing. We're just lagging from that perspective. And that's strictly with our business systems. Of course, we have advanced systems in terms of what we're doing with the airplanes and products we do, but our business systems are lagging a little bit, and we are focused on that.
That's awesome. I'm sure we'd all be very interested to hear about how implementing these new systems, as far as rotation and collaboration, and even technology, how that goes for you all. So maybe that's a 3rd call, maybe. Yeah. We do have another question here for you. Through looking at your biography and the video you shared at our previous conversation in October, it appears you and many Boeing employees take pride in the outputs of the company. Where does the pride originate? So maybe yours specifically, or even overall as a company, and does the company make an effort to instill this into its employees? And if so, how?
Yeah, I had to think about that question a little bit when it was first reviewed with me, and I think certainly from, there's 2 really big segments to the Boeing companies. There's defense products that we work on, and there's commercial products that we work on. And certainly my background and experience is predominantly with commercial products. And I think a lot of the pride and value that we see on a daily basis when we talk about our commercial products is it takes years of development to go into the launch and bringing a commercial product into the marketplace. And just the sheer volume of work tied to it, and then maintaining the product once we bring it into production, you're pretty vested in it and have a strong tie back to it. So from that standpoint, I think there absolutely is a correlation and value that we see tied back to our products. With our defense products, I don't necessarily have that background, but I would assume the same for our teams working on defense products, and that even incorporates a level of technology we don't see in many instances on the commercial side. So I would think that there would be strong similarities. In terms of how do we connect that back with our employees, I think we need to do a better job, and that might be part of when I came up in the company, you started out working with the mechanics building the airplane. Even as an engineer, we'd be out working with the mechanics, and as we've matured our business, we've kind of gotten away from that, and now we go more into functional silos in terms of how we align, even starting new into the company. And I think, still working from a functional standpoint, but having the ability to go see what the products you're responsible for, and getting that correlation of how they tie back into that product and airplane that's ultimately getting delivered to our customers, and millions of people are going to fly on an annual basis. I think that's really important for our people to go see. So the question it's a good question, and I do think there's a correlation, and definitely a lot of pride we have back to our products. But for our employees that are coming in and learning their statement of work and don't necessarily have that foundation and knowledge of the products themselves, and I'm talking the airplanes, probably need to do a better job connecting their statement of work back to ultimately what they're supporting.
Well, thank you for that. That's I think that's very insightful. Joel and I had a little bit of conversation about that question itself, because he initially came up with that idea. So is there anything that you wanted to say specifically about that, Joel, or any other question that's stemming off of his response?
No, I think that's great. And yeah, I'd like to probably keep moving on to our next question here. So this next question is a little more technical. It kind of comes from a little more of my aviation background, just because I'm curious. And then also, I just received word that I'm going to be kind of interning over at Boeing this next summer. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So the next question is, when creating durable goods, such as commercial airplanes that can fly for decades, how does Boeing ensure that the product's future-proof? And so, for instance, in avionics, technology grows at an incredibly fast rate, and that might cause systems to become antiquated after a few years. And do you think this translates, and you kind of touched on this, do you think this translates into how Boeing treats its business processes?
Yeah, first and foremost, you're absolutely right. Our platforms are typically based on anywhere from a 30 to 40-year life cycle. In terms of the systems and kind of interchangeability of incorporating new technology, especially with what we're seeing with a lot of video capability and cell phone use, more and more with smartphones, we have to be able to adapt. Now, in aviation, we're regulated, so we can't just go plug something into an airplane. There's a qualification process we have to go through. We have to certify whatever we incorporate into our production certificate for the airplanes that we're delivering to customers. And that's all regulated through the agencies where we're delivering the aircraft, including the FAA, for our domestic certificates. So from that standpoint, there's definitely a process we have to go through when we bring something online. Our systems, though, we're constantly changing systems and updating technologies. Just to put it in perspective, talking broad numbers, I would say at any given time, we've got anywhere from 100 to 1,000 changes that we would have in our pipeline of change activity we're working on from a commercial standpoint.
Wow, that's definitely impressive, and I think there's an interesting kind of tie over there between both what you're doing with the airplane itself, and I think then as the company itself. So, I'll be interested, I think, coming this next summer to kind of see how that works and how that will how that moves forward. So, I think we'll go ahead and move on. We can maybe come back to the fourth question at the end, but I would like to go into your questions that you asked to us, Steve. And so I'd like to start off with question number one, and this is going to be answered by Mr. Parker Holterman from Fort Hays State University. The question was, the millennial workplace reputation is often misunderstood. How do you address and debunk the following perceptions? And then you listed the following perceptions: wanting to set their own terms of working, when and how they want over a traditional working environment, exaggerated expectations of what is deserved, and a dissonance against traditional authority, needing additional direction and assistance when learning job functions, and then finally, always on the search for the next opportunity and less anchored to current opportunities. So Parker, do you want to hop on and answer that question?
Yes, I do. So beginning with part A, wanting to set their own terms of working when and how they want over traditional working environment. You are not what you're not around. So exposure with social media has led people to have unrealistic expectations. We want to be perfectionists, but we don't want to put the work in, so we're seen as narcissistic individuals. As far as like how they want to work and like when they want to work, I kind of identify with that because I'm an entrepreneur, so my schedule is like 24/7. If I want to work on something, I'm going to work on it. But whenever I'm in like a traditional working environment, there's obviously rules that people have to abide by. When that goes back to your social media, your exposure, we don't get to see the daily grind of people before they're successful entrepreneurs. We don't get to see the engineers hanging around mechanics. We only get to see the top end, and that's inspirational to some degree, but at the same time, unrealistic expectations. Part B, wanting to set their own terms of working. Oh, that's bad. Exaggerated expectations of what is deserved and a dissonance against traditional authority. So to answer this one, I'm going to start off with Max Weber's 3 types of authority. Traditional authority indicates the presence of a dominant personality. This leader is someone who depends on established tradition or order. This type of leadership, however, is reflective of everyday routine and conduct. So if you're outside of your own routine, then obviously you're going to need more collaboration versus the top-down management. If you need a micromanager, but you already said you're trying to get rid of micromanagers, you're trying to get out of that redundancy. So that dissonance is just millennials kind of understand where we're headed. We're headed towards a paradigm shift of human application. Part C, needing additional direction and assistance when learning job functions. So there's going to be a trade-off. We're really good at being stimulated in multiple directions, but at the same time, if we have to figure out like a new specific function, you need to hold our hand. You have to teach us a little bit different, and we're just the generation that's kind of the way we need to learn. I don't know, maybe people are different across the board, but that's kind of how I've been with my traditional work experience. You have to show me, you have to tell me, you have to tell me the application. I need to understand why. But then the outside perspectives that we bring in, being so open-minded, is we can tell you, well, wouldn't you want to do it this way? Wouldn't this way be a little bit more effective? And then part D, always on the search for the next opportunity and less anchored to current opportunities. That's just how we've been raised. We're exposed to so many different things, our connectivity with information, different individuals. We're able to see more opportunities, and you know, if there's a better opportunity out there, we're going to take it. Thank you.
All right, and then I believe LJ wanted to jump in on the question just really quick. LJ, are you there?
Working on putting our webcam on. Hold on.
Yeah.
Hello, Steve.
Hello.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to answer. I'll just kind of give Parker gave a really granular answer, which I think was really cool, but I'll try to give a little bit more of an overarching answer, and kind of in 2 ways. So the millennial workplace reputation often misunderstood. How do you address, debunk the following perceptions? From a personal standpoint, I got to be honest, I don't think I can say anything that's going to debunk any of these stereotypes. I think the only way that I can even attempt to debunk any of the stereotypes is through action. So when I got my job, you know, it wasn't about, you know, kind of telling people what I was doing. It was about just kind of putting my head down and doing. And I think that often that's kind of misrepresented within the millennial community, just because of the way that we work. It's a different style of working, and you don't always see it, right? So, you know, for example, somebody could leave the office at 4 o'clock and go home and work for 3 more hours, but you don't know they worked for 3 more hours, right? Unless you're on an email thread with them. So one thing that I did was, instead of, going home and working, I would just stay at the office and do the work like I would normally do. That's one part of my personality. But two, I think that who I worked with appreciated the fact that, I was there and I was able to communicate with them in person. And that kind of segues into the second thing. Not always, emailing and, talking online. I think it's important that you walk into the office and you talk to a person face to face. And I think that's a huge, huge part of just kind of meeting people halfway and demonstrating. Not saying that we're going to, debunk the mystifications and some of the misperceptions, but I think demonstrating it through action. And then that being said, last thing I want to mention is I read an article, I think about a year ago, and then we actually talked to another executive about this, how the millennial generation is the first generation to enter the workforce with as much to teach as they have to learn, is what they were saying. The fact that, they're kind of these digital adapters, they can really teach some of these senior people, how to use technology and how to make it, how to make that part of their advantage when they're in their position. And that's not to discount the sheer amount that they have to learn about their position and about their company. But I think, because of that kind of handicap in some sense, for some of the senior levels, I think it created a little bit of miscommunication, because, they're coming in with this kind of different perspective and different way of trying to, do something and trying to teach how they're, they're thinking. And it sometimes comes off as, maybe entitled or maybe lazy and so on and so forth. So again, I think really when it comes down to it, the only way that we can ever debunk some of these mystifications is to show through action.
Yeah, if you can figure out what that article is, I'd love to have it and read it. I think what you just outlined, we kind of refer to that internally here as positive tension for change that we're seeing from our newer generation of employees that are coming into the company. And I think it's a good thing. It's forcing us to think differently and adopt. I think it becomes a discussion around velocity. Can we do it fast? Can we incorporate change fast enough, or show progress towards change fast enough that it suffices on both ends of the spectrum? There's a little bit of a balancing act there.
Well, that's great. And I'm going to go ahead and keep moving on to question number 2, if that's all right with you, Steve.
Yeah, sounds great.
Wonderful. And so I'm going to actually answer question 2 here. And just so everybody knows, that question is, what are your biggest frustrations with baby boomers and Gen X leaders? What are some key steps they can take to lessen the divide among generations within their work groups? And so with this question, I really went out. I said, I have a perception of my own, but I decided to go out to a couple other millennials, not only in the community, but also here in Montana. The first one I came across was, we're frustrated typically by an inefficient use of technology. And kind of as LJ was saying there, our generation really is the digital adapter. We like new technology, and we're very aware when new technology comes out. And so currently I work in aviation, and aviation, I think, is historically a very, very tall. It's always been very rigid. And so when things are done one way, they're done that way for a while. And especially right now, I'm working in airports. Airports work on, 20, 30-year plans as well. And so the main frustration with that is we know how to do the task and we can do it well, but the process slows us down. And so when we see that gap and see that inefficiency taking place, it's frustrating. And it makes me feel, or I would maybe say makes a lot of millennials feel, that maybe we're not really using our resources to their best capacity at that point. And just a couple examples of this is, for instance, at my current job, they weren't using something that could be easily replaced by cloud-based software. They were, taking down tail numbers of airplanes, when really all they needed to do was put those into a cloud spreadsheet and their job was done, whereas we were copying things from pieces of paper over onto the computer and vice versa. So a lot of people, and I think that these managers, they're like, why didn't we know about this? And the main thing I can say is just ask. We really don't mind answering those questions and troubleshooting that. In fact, myself personally, I love that. I love that opportunity to say, this is the problem. Can we do it a little bit more efficiently? And that's great. That's kind of where we are with technology. Moving on to the second frustration, and I kind of just talked about this. We get frustrated with tall teams and tall organizations instead of having a flat team. And what I mean by that is I don't want necessarily a position just to be a body in the room. I want to be treated as a member of that team. Granted, I don't necessarily want my opinion being treated higher than anybody else, but I do want my voice to be heard. And so, again, this comes down to sometimes just asking, saying, hey, do you have a suggestion now? Do you have maybe any experience with this? And it's getting everybody in that room and really that collaborative sense. And that really goes on to my third point, which is a lack of collaboration. I think with those tall organizations, it used to be, okay, you report to your boss and you do what that boss says. Especially, I think, with aviation businesses, we see that a little bit more than usual. I've kind of come across this idea a couple times where it's this idea, you sit in your box and I'll sit in mine and let's do that. I don't think that's making use of everybody's skills. And it comes down to just knowing the team, knowing who has skills in certain areas. And that's probably the hardest part. And so moving forward, if I have a boss, really what I'm looking for is that person has gotten to know me as a person so that I can contribute in the best way I can to that team as well.
Okay. Get ready for your internship, Joel.
No, yeah, I've heard some stuff for sure.
No, I think the way you characterized it, I say get ready for your internship in jest, but really you are going to see, diversity in terms of how we do things, and you're going to see things where there's opportunity to improve, and I encourage you, bring those ideas and opportunities up. They may be heard, and they may be, you may encounter some pushback, but that's kind of the positive tension I was talking about. There's definitely better ways we can get things done, even within a regulated environment. So, I encourage you, bring a voice to the organization you're going to be supporting.
Great, will do, thank you. Moving on to our third question here is going to be answered by Ms. Edith Gomez. She's an alumni from California State University, Northridge. The question there is, the Millennial Impact Report for 2015 showed that millennials are more influenced by their peers than CEOs. How can a corporation adapt to this variant of influence?
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, here we go. So I think the way to answer this question is not by the way you adapt to it is you nurture it and you guide it. So my best thing is to don't fight the gradient, but really participate in it. And that is really through building those relationships and through shared experiences. So there's a lot of research that really indicates that working relationships with different coworkers and building environments where they feel comfortable to be able to ask for help or to just really even share interests really creates that dynamic that allows for the performance to increase. So, I mean, I think a lot of great things that agencies, for example, do with regard to millennials and then younger workers is that they create either office excursions, they create happy hours and cocktails where, yes, you do get to mingle with other coworkers that potentially are in other departments, but also there's the opportunity to really be able to build a personal relationship with the higher ups, with the senior level people, where there's not an intensity or an anxiety between like, oh, we have to discuss reports. It becomes more of a social setting, and I think that's where you're able to grow interpersonal relationships within the company and within your team as well. I would also vouch to say that if there are opportunities where you create an environment where employees can contribute to community projects that Boeing is involved in and allow them to take the lead and really lead it. I think that really speaks to the creativity of the team, but then also that Boeing is willing to bet on their people to do good and really represent them in a positive way.
Great. When you say, I definitely get the social hour aspect of it. Can it be inside work, or do you mostly encourage activities outside of work?
I think actually both speak to different points. I think when you do incorporate an activity, it becomes much more competitive and playful in that sense where there's no status involved anymore, and it becomes much more liberating, I would say. So, I mean, for example, if me and LJ are competing against basketball, I mean, we're just going to really have fun and really get into it. But, see, where he needs there. But also just, being able to be able to have your employees experience a new environment that otherwise they wouldn't. So whether that be new restaurants or panoramic views of like a hike or just a rooftop bar, I think that really speaks to the opportunities that Boeing gives their employees to experience something other than their norm.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Appreciate it.
All right, moving into question 4. How do you think the Gen Z population will differ from your generation? And what will this potentially introduce into the corporate environment? And I believe LJ is going to take that, and he's an alumni from Western Connecticut State University.
You're probably getting sick of me already, but I'll be really brief. So I just wanted to bring up 2 things. So we actually did a little conference on Gen Z and Millennial in the workplace, and we created an infographic, and there was 2 points that I wanted to just call out, and I'm happy to send you the infographic afterwards. But the first was, I think actually in workplace communication is going to change, where I think a lot of people are talking about how it's going to be more digital and more through the internet and through Slack and things like that. I actually found a stat that said 51% of millennials and Gen Z prefer in-person communication as opposed to direct online. It doesn't mean that they don't use online, but I think they find and see value in speaking in person. So I think that's going to shift, especially, kind of when millennials entered the workforce, the technology in terms of communication was just kind of becoming the commodity. So it's interesting, you wanted to put it everywhere. But now, Gen Z has kind of grown up with this technology, and it's just become, a norm for them. So the commodity is actually the human interaction. That's what's valuable to them, because that's what's unique, and that's what they can't get at home. And then secondly, there is a stat that says 71% of Gen Z said they believe in the phrase, if you want it done right, then do it yourself. So I think you may see a difference in self-reliance and self-competence with the next generation, I think, just because of the individualism they have and the environment they grew up with all of the information at their fingertips. They've always just been able to do it themselves, didn't necessarily need to ask for help. So not saying they won't ask for help, but I think that they're going to want to be a little bit more self-competent. But these are just predictions. And I'm happy to share any information that you find valuable with you.
So are you essentially saying that we're going to be Snapchatting? No comment.
All right, so I think we'll move into our 5th question here. What does your generation bring to the workplace that will help a business to develop and grow at a faster rate and with more success? This question is going to be answered by Haley Laus of Eastern Wyoming College.
Hi, is everyone able to hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you. Are you able to turn on your webcam at all?
Yes. I think is it working?
We're just hearing the audio right now.
Not sure if I'm able to get this working. This mall isn't a very good place, but I'll answer the question anyway.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, in the middle of moving, but I think that there's a few things that millennials are able to bring to the workplace that other generations haven't done as much or weren't doing in the past. One of the things, and we've even seen this in this call thus far, is they're able to quickly identify problems within a workplace or within a business, but then also really quickly offer a solution or a method to fix the problem. And another thing I think they're able to bring is they have an innate knowledge on social media that older generations didn't have the opportunity to get. So they really know how to market to people via social media in a way that hasn't been able to before. They're able to reach out to a large number of people quicker than they ever were able to before.
All right. Well, well, thank you for that answer, Haley. And then I'm going to hand it over to Sydney now to finish up with the rest of these questions.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you, Haley. So for number 6, the question is, what company or companies have done the best at optimizing the diversity of the different generations among their workforce? And what do you think are the key steps they took that made this possible? And so we're going to have Mr. Garrett Young of Eastern Oregon University to answer this question.
Hello. First of all, well, starting, I just want to say thank you for giving us this time today and letting us answer these questions and also listen to the wisdom that you have to give us. Well, to start it off, first, Sodexo and Johnson & Johnson come to mind when I think of companies that are optimizing the different diverse qualities across generational gaps. And I really speak to that because they focus their topics on diversity and inclusion. So people kind of forget about the inclusion part when they speak about diversity. And you can see this displayed when they market and spread the products across the US, when they have women and African Americans and just people of color working everywhere. And if that's lower level or if that's in the upper level, some statistics I was looking at for Sodexo was 40% of the workforce for the company is a woman, and I think that was really cool, and that's pretty rare to see nowadays, to have such a high percentage of women in the workforce. And so I guess just to finish off, the last part would be like I said, the marketing platforms. If you see any type of their product or any of their product placement, they use people of all color, people of all different backgrounds, and they're able to I guess reach to a larger market that way. And so that's what really speaks to me when I see their product, and that makes me want to I guess continue on and go get my food with Sodexo, because we have that at school here as well. But yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. So we'll just keep on moving here. We're going to go to number 7, and that question is, how do you feel Boeing is doing with addressing the concerns of your generation, and what could be done better? We're going to have Ms. Betsy Garcia from California State University, Northridge, to answer that question.
Let's see, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I was pleased to see when, in researching this question, I actually looked at a survey that's the World Economic Forum Global Shaper Survey. They do an annual survey, and it basically includes about 31,000 18 to 35-year-olds from like 186 countries to weigh in on like key issues. So their question was, what are the most important or more serious issues affecting the world today? And 48% of people who like put in the survey that climate change and the destruction of nature as their most biggest concern, so the environment. And I was very pleased to see that Boeing, in your guys' global prioritization study, you guys put that was the most important concern that you guys had for your company. So I was very pleased to like note that you guys were looking at fuel efficiency, operational efficiency, and sustainable aviation fuel as like your top concerns. So I was very pleased to see that. I also wanted to ask about within your environmental report from last year, you guys did not specify any specific goals for the incoming year. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, we certainly do have goals. I mean, from zero emissions on aircraft that we're putting out, you know, that's definitely a goal we're looking at. You've already referenced the use of synthetics or biofuels that we're trying to move to. You know, it's going to be a bigger aviation and aerospace challenge, but we've definitely demonstrated the capability to go to that technology. In terms of, I'd say one of the bigger things we've done, and certainly predominant through the Puget Sound region here in Washington State, a zero landfill objective was implemented about 2 years ago. And my understanding is that almost for the most part, we've gone to almost a zero fill contribution. So huge initiatives around recycling, reuse, and making sure that we're trying to protect from that perspective. But in terms of specific measurables, there's definitely from a product standpoint, there are objectives that we try to hit. We have to coordinate with specific countries on their environmental requirements to make sure our products can fly in and out of there, so our customers aren't being penalized. And then typically the specific environmental objectives that we have would be broken down into specific business units or organizations, and we would have objectives we're trying to work with our employees.
Okay. Yeah, that was really my only concern, because the report, it listed the goals, but I was a bit concerned because they weren't specific. They weren't measurable. And to to make a good goal, you must have it must be specific, it must be measurable, and it has to be attainable.
Yeah, when I'm personally taking on, you know, we move over 1 billion parts a year, and my new job, I've got about 70% of that part portfolio for the business, and a tremendous amount of packaging dunnage that we currently use as we move parts around. I would like to, and I am working with our teams and suppliers to see what we can do to reduce that footprint, so that we get to reusable kits that we can cycle back and forth between us and the suppliers that are providing parts.
Okay. All right. Did you have any more, or is there any way I can answer your question better, or did you have anything else?
No, I think you know, certainly we have a huge focus around certain business elements, but I think until you just brought it up now, I mean, I see environmental elements on a regular basis when I'm looking at our higher level objectives, but the way you characterized it, I think I better start thinking about how I tie it into our organizations and make sure that we have focused efforts around that. So I really appreciate the input.
All right.
Thank you, Betsy. All right, so that was actually a great introduction into this next question, which I will be answering myself. Again, I'm Sydney Henry from Georgia Southern University. And the question is, what are some best practice examples of how companies are doing things differently in a way that your generation can relate and flourish? And so just to piggyback off of what Betsy just said, one of our biggest concerns is the environment, as well as making our mark and making it a better place. So for like an actual company example, so I have one from a company and one personal example that I want to share, would be for SurveyMonkey. So what they've started doing to attract millennials as customers and as employees is to give them a way to make the world a better place. And this is, I see you smiling, this is actually kind of a popular example, is that what they've been doing is doing 50 cents per survey that you complete. They give that 50 cents to a charity of your choice. And so the way that that's bringing in employees is because of course we want to work for a company that's doing more than just making money. And it's bringing in customers because, you know, it incentivizes the survey if of charity is profiting. So I just thought that was a great example of something that's going on. And I don't know how Boeing can specifically do that, but if there's anything that you all do on a regular basis where you could actually offer, you know, charities or other incentives as a way to get feedback from people, even just your employees, I think that would be great. Also, another, you know, more personal example would be game-like micro learning, micro milestones when it comes to trainings. Trainings or anything that's like, you know, you're just getting started with things, maybe interviewing or something like that. But what's really good is if you have kind of like a step basis. So somewhere we can have that instant gratification that, of course, millennials are famous for loving, is where you know, goals that we can automatically achieve, levels to things like, oh, you understand this, so you get to move on. Or if you don't, then let's go over that again on a more game-like basis on the computer, not so much in a presentation where someone's presenting over a PowerPoint, because we love our computers, we love our apps. So if there's some kind of virtual learning system that you can use, even with current employees, to kind of, you know, help them kind of go over things they maybe learned in training. Because if you've been working the same job for 10 or 20 years, there might be some things you might, you know, need a little brushing up on. And so those were the two biggest things. And so I think that's really, really good, as well as leadership development programs. I think you all were talking about how you want to get away from that top-down way of doing things. And so I think the shadowing or the buddy system or the coupling of seniors with lower ranking employees to really help them feel like they're working towards something. And it kind of bridges that gap. So if you have someone moving up that doesn't have as much experience, and now they've got to shadow that person, they'll even do better at their job. So I thought that was a good way to, some best practice examples of how you all could definitely improve the workplace.
Yeah, and we do a lot of job shadowing as part of our development activities with future leaders that we're trying to grow and cultivate in the organization. Even at my level, I'll shadow on a pretty regular basis with senior leaders that are above my level. So it's fairly common practice, and we do that throughout our different levels within our different organizations. And then we even cross-pollinate to different organizations and shadow so that our employees get different perspectives into different roles people are working in. In terms of the, what did I write here? Oh, charity. In terms of the community giving, I believe Boeing is one of the largest charitable companies in the United States in terms of the programs that we support and the employee contributions that we provide our employees to support, and we also do a significant amount of matching in terms of, I think, well over 50 million just this last year with organizations we did direct support with. So certainly a high priority. I was interestingly enough with my boss when I closed out last year. I think that's one of the things we don't market very well, even with our own employees. We talk about it and our employees sign up for it, we do it, and then we don't go and market exactly what it means and tie it back to our local communities with stories and what it means to the community that's actually receiving the benefit. And years ago, we used to do that quite a bit. So I think that's something we need to bring back. So that our employees can see the benefits, and I think it will even lead to more contribution from the company.
Awesome.
And just to jump in on that, Steve, I mean, having just gone through kind of the hiring process too, had it not been kind of my interests, I don't think I would have found out about those opportunities. I kind of dug a little bit deeper and was able to find them. And I think that's fine. You'll always have people that are willing to do that. But like you said, with the marketing piece, you might be, Boeing as a company might be missing out on it's a fairly good talent who really could connect to those sort of stories and connect to this idea of matching funds and different things like that. And the other thing I noticed, maybe something practical that could be brought to the table, was there wasn't really an example of how it was used. There was facts and figures, but maybe a story needs to be tied in there as well, saying, okay, what organizations were we donating to? Where was this money doing, and what did it actually do?
Yeah, and I think that's what I was alluding to. We do a great job communicating the statistics, but I'm not sure we do a good job telling the story and getting a collection of stories that really tie back and personalize just how significant a lot of the contributions are. I mean, a lot of the contributions we make are life-changing for the people that are able to receive the benefit. So I think it's something we need to do better, and it was something I highlighted towards the end of last year. I'm passionate about it. I support an environmental nonprofit where I sit on the board, and the company received a couple of $100,000 of contribution from Boeing this past year. And what spurred the conversation was the leader I work for didn't know that we had made that contribution, yet alone what the environmental company is doing here in the local Puget Sound area. And when I walked through it, she was like, we've got to do a better job messaging this, because all of us, it's one of our executive focus points in the company to be tied in with nonprofits or in the community, supporting government wherever we can help out. We don't go and market that at all, and we just need to do a better job sharing the story.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to jump into the last question that we received from you, and it is, if you were to tell me one thing about your generation that most people don't know, what would it be? And so we're going to have Mr. Melosi answer this. Are you here?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Do you have webcam? Okay, there you go.
All right, awesome. Hi, Steve. My name is Melosi. I'm here at Eastern Wyoming College. I'm a freshman. And it's really good to hear all these great comments and to get to know you a little bit better. But to answer your question, I have something that will tie into the answer first. And it's something that we all know about today's generation. It says, I think our generation has a great technology skill compared to others. With that being said, our generation expects things to happen instantly, if that makes sense. And that is kind of my answer compared to the first part. But with the technology skill, is our generation, they know how to work around things. And so they'll do their best to get what they want at the moment. But a con with that is that we're not very patient, if that makes sense. We will want something so bad at the moment, but besides that, we have to work for it, if that makes sense. And so, and I've noticed that with my life personally. Like, I always want something, and then my dad's like, all right, well, what are you gonna do? That's always the big question. What would you do to accomplish what you want? And so that's probably my biggest thing that most people about our generation, they may not know, is that we want stuff and we will work for it, but only if we really do desire it. A lot of people think that we're lazy, which in some extent it is true. There is a little laziness, but if we want something, we will work for it. And it's something that proves with generations in today's world. And so that's my answer. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Melosi, do you believe that, as I outlined when we started, I think there's an importance for us to start connecting our employees back to products that they support more. Because today, in my particular organization, I outlined, we're buying billions of parts. For that employee to understand the part they're buying that goes to the airplane, do you think that's an important thread, so that they may have that stronger foundation and desire to rally around the product rather than just seeing the part and that part only.
Yes, I do agree with that. I think it's very important.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
I really wanted to add one quick thing onto, it just jumped in my mind when I was reading that question is, there are so many more graduates now than have ever been. People are graduating college, and it's more of a success rate than there ever has been. And the competition is so steep, even in just my classrooms, with teachers actually having us compete in class. And so I think one thing that people don't realize about our generations, even though we're so fortunate to have all these technologies and all these opportunities, we're actually under a lot of stress from competition. It's really a competitive environment for jobs, for internships. And so if I could relate that to higher ups in companies, I would love for them to know that we're definitely trying our best to be our best. And so that's where some of that wanting to get our voice heard and things comes from, because we're in competition. We really are. So thank you, Melosi, for that. That was very insightful.
And I wanted to add on one thing as well, just to the connecting to the product. As someone who clearly wants to work for Boeing and admires kind of the work that they do, that was another thing I didn't notice as much in the hiring process. And they do this kind of speed dating thing right now with managers, and that's kind of how you ultimately get chosen, where you fall into. And just reading some of the job descriptions, you can see that certain jobs are written in such a way that it does connect you with that pride with the product, whereas other ones are very much just task focused. You're there for a skill that you have, and that's about it. When it doesn't really translate into, no, I care about that product. And as an example of myself, the 787, I followed that airplane since I was 4 years old, or since it really started coming out. And to have the opportunity to even be a small part in that, I think there is a large portion of kids out there that grow up with the stream of working on airplanes and different things like that, and not even just that, but also the space and defense systems that Boeing does. And so I think even that can extend as far as day one, entering in that door and saying, okay, this is how you contribute.
Great, thank you. I really do appreciate the feedback, and I think it's going to be a really important aspect for us to thread back into our business when we're thinking about what our specific job responsibility is, but how it fits kind of back into the holistic business and what we're really ultimately trying to support. So I do really appreciate the perspective.
Thank you so much. I think we all want to say a quick thank you and goodbye to Mr. Stephen Patneaude. It's right at 2:58 my time, so we got 2 more minutes on the call. If we could see everybody. Hey, Bill. Hello. And some people did call in, so we can't see them, but.
Yeah.
Hello.
Well, thank you. I really do appreciate the opportunity to meet with the organization. If there's anything we can do in the future, we'd be more than happy to arrange future activities. And we see this engagement, as a real opportunity to learn and adapt as we work into the future. And as I shared when we first met, we're dealing with attrition, and there's challenges we've seen with the Millennial group that we've been working with. And we celebrated our first 100 years of business in 2016, and our focus is really to create that legacy for the next 100 years and continue to keep this business going forward and being really healthy. So we do appreciate the dialogue and find this extremely useful.